Could you describe some examples and sources of environmental racism in your district and say how they have affected OUSD students, parents, and educators? What commitments can you make towards combating the disproportionate impact of pollutant exposures on OUSD students, parents, and educators?
Well, the environmental racism in Oakland can really be looked at actually better in a citywide sense, and District 5 definitely fits into that. And so all environmental hazards are only put in the flatlands below 580. These are not really issues that are faced by the Hills communities as directly. And so we can look at it from the lead in the environment, in the houses all through the Fruitvale neighborhood where I grew up. There's still an issue with lead paint and lead in the soil. There's the environmental racism of that's where all the major freeways are placed. That's where heavy industry is placed in the same neighborhoods where our schools are located and where communities are located. And really what I'm trying to do with my campaign is really change the framing of this a little bit. We need to make all of these issues community-wide issues for the benefit of all of us. And so one of the things, the way District 5 is created is a majority of District 5 is actually the Fruitvale neighborhood, but there are 4 precincts in Glenview, and those 4 voting precincts usually control the elections. Oh. And so a lot of this, I try to look at it another way. Instead of pointing out the examples of environmental racism, is really trying to district-wide start the conversation that we're all in this together, and that when a school in the lower bottoms, when a school below 880 is facing these threats, it's actually also still a threat at Glenview. And so we know that historically and in this country, if you're in a neighborhood that has a high density of people of color or a high population of low-income families, that you're going to face more threats, including environmental racism under this capitalist model. And so our best solution, especially since the school board can't fix everything in society, is to make sure we are bringing that equity to our school sites, and to make sure that our school sites, when we're talking about funding, the environmental racism that certain communities face can be addressed through funding and resources, so we make sure that those communities are getting the extra resources they need.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So could you describe some examples and sources of environmental racism in your district and say how they have affected OUSD students, parents, and educators? And the second part is, what commitments can you make towards combating the disproportionate impacts of pollutant exposure on OUSD students, parents, and educators?
Environmental racism in my district. Well, I was a counselor for 2 years at United for Success Academy right here in the heart of the Fruitvale. And I walked to school. So I saw a lot of the pollution just on the way to school, number one, anywhere from needles to bottles. And it was a conversation I would have with students directly. And we just got kind of passionate about it and trying to figure out, well, what can we do as a community? How can we change it? And so we were in the process of working with some of our partners in the area, for example, Peralta, the museum there, I can't think of the name, at Peralta. They were willing to work with us and try to put some things in place. Some other examples, I would say, just there's an air of I don't know what to call it that's in the air, but we just noted that, you know, in our area, it seemed that the air itself was not as clear as it should be. There were some students that had done an experiment through their social studies class. And they did some samples. They took some samples and they were experimenting with the samples and figuring out, wow, the quality of our air isn't that good. Why is that? And so we got into the discussion about, the different industries in the area. We're in between two main freeways. Is this an accident? So there was a whole discussion that came up about that related to race, and the disproportionate number of schools in our area, in our immediate area, that were subject to the various pollutants. So I say all that just to share as an example that yes, I am definitely in favor of doing whatever I need to do to ensure that there are equities when it comes to our schools. I find that, the schools, again, that are on this side of town, I'll say it like that, have been subject to pollutants for many years. And it just seems to me like we need to work more with industry, with the different corporations and industries around, to make it a community responsibility. Oh, got a little partner there. It's okay. A community responsibility to change that, because I just I don't want my kids. I don't want and I say they're my kids because every kid in this neighborhood is my kid as far as I'm concerned. I don't want them to have to walk to school and see this. I don't want them to have to walk in this kind of, air and risk increasing levels of asthma and whatever else health-wise that they're experiencing. So that I definitely would have that commitment to all parents, all educators, and all community stakeholders.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Could you describe how some examples and sources of environmental racism in your district, and say how they have affected OUSD students, parents, and educators? And what commitments can you make towards combating the disproportionate impacts of pollutant exposure on OUSD students, parents, and educators?
Yeah, well, there's two types of environments that are toxic in Oakland and need to be addressed. And one is the built environment, and the other is the quality of the education for our students. The fact is that even though we're losing historically, the amount of participation of Black teachers in Oakland, and we've never even managed to reach a parity with the amount of kids with Latinos. So the issue is, as long as you don't have African American and Latinx community involved in policy and decision making, we won't have a truly representative, diverse, accessible school district. So that's homework that we need to do. That's not about charter schools and our good intentions for kids. That has to do how we structure things in Oakland. So I look at HR, but I also want to meet with Tony Thurman. We need to meet with all our local legislative bodies and come up with a plan to address equity, access, and representation. I don't want to be used as a brown person as a token. I don't want to see a Black person over here or a brown person over there and they're saying, oh, we're diverse. To me, the issue is not diversity. The issue is equity. People will say Oakland is the most diverse school district in California. Well, it's diverse, no doubt about it, but it's not the most equitable. I want to shoot for the equity.
Thank you.